They forced a poor servant girl onto a raging stallion, expecting disaster. But what unfolded shocked an entire estate. From whispered courage at dawn to defiance before the rich, a fragile bond grew between a girl, a black horse, and the daughter of a proud man. Each trial pushed them to the edge of ruin until one leap changed everything and left a truth no power could silence. The Carter family had always lived in the shadows of the Harrison estate, where marble columns rose against the Kentucky sky and the stables gleamed as if they belonged in a magazine spread. Emily Carter, 12 years old, carried a tray of lemonade glasses through the manicured garden on the afternoon of the Harringtons' annual summer gathering. Her shoes were scuffed, the hem of her dress uneven from too many hand-me-downs, and her hair was tied in a hurried braid. She knew she didn't belong among the silk dresses and polished boots, but her mother had asked her to help, and saying no wasn't an option. The guests, wealthy breeders and investors from across the state, lounged beneath wide awnings. Their laughter floated through the air like champagne bubbles, bright but cutting. Emily tried to keep her head down, though curiosity tugged at her. There were tables covered in silver trays, an ice sculpture in the shape of a horse, and men boasting about bloodlines and trophies. As she hurried past, she caught fragments of conversation. Pedigrees, winnings, auctions. The world they spoke of felt as distant as the stars. Mr. Harrison himself stood near the stables, a glass of bourbon in his hand, his broad frame commanding attention. His pride was not in his mansion or his fortune, but in his horses. Everyone knew he had recently acquired a stallion so wild that no trainer had managed to ride it. The guests pressed him for a glimpse, their curiosity mixed with skepticism. Harrison's face tightened. To him, losing face was unthinkable. Emily balanced the tray carefully, but one of the young men, tall, sharp-eyed, with the air of someone used to being admired, stuck out his boot just enough to make her stumble. Lemonade splashed, and laughter erupted. Her cheeks burned as she bent to clean the mess, her small fingers trembling. "Careful, sweetheart," the man sneered, his friends chuckling behind him. She wanted to vanish into the ground. From the corner of her eye, Emily saw Claire Harrison, the daughter of the estate, watching silently. Claire was about the same age, dressed in pale silk, her golden hair braided neatly. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. Claire's gaze wasn't mocking, but curious, almost sympathetic, but she quickly looked away. Emily felt a pang of envy mixed with an odd connection she couldn't yet explain. The afternoon wore on. Music floated from the veranda, violins paired with laughter. Horses were paraded, polished to perfection, their handlers proud and cautious. But the whispers kept circling. What about the stallion, the soul's black one? The untamable one? Each mention seemed to dig deeper into Mr. Harrison's pride. He raised his glass and finally declared, "Very well. You want to see Thunderbolt? Follow me." The crowd surged toward the far paddock. Emily followed too, though she knew she shouldn't, her heart thudding with curiosity. The stable doors groaned as they opened, and there he was, Thunderbolt. A magnificent stallion as dark as midnight, muscles rippling beneath his coat, eyes blazing with fire. He slammed a hoof against the ground, and the sound echoed like thunder. Even the seasoned breeders took a cautious step back. Gasps rippled through the group. "Beautiful beast," someone muttered, "but dangerous." Another laughed. "All beauty, no discipline." "What's the point?" Mr. Harrison's jaw tightened. He boasted about Thunderbolt's pedigree, his raw power, his unmatched spirit. Yet, when a guest suggested mounting him, silence fell. No one dared. The air grew heavy, the stallion's snorts mixing with the murmurs of doubt. Emily, clutching the empty tray to her chest, felt a strange pull toward the horse. She saw not only rage in his eyes, but fear, like a storm searching for calm. Still, she kept quiet. She was just the housekeeper's daughter, invisible to most of them. That invisibility, however, was about to shatter. One of the men glanced at Emily, standing awkwardly at the edge of the gathering. A smirk spread across his face. "If no man here has the courage, why not let the little servant girl try?" Now that would be entertaining. His companions roared with laughter. The words cut through the air like a whip. Mr. Harrison's pride, already stretched thin, found an outlet. His smile was tight, his tone dripping with condescension. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "it is time we see who here has true courage." "Emily, step forward." Every head turned toward her. Emily froze, her pulse pounding in her ears. The laughter rose again, some mocking, some expectant. She wanted to say no, to disappear back into the kitchen. But Mr. Harrison's eyes held her captive, cold and commanding. She realized, with a sinking weight in her stomach, that she had no choice. And so, beneath the Kentucky sun, surrounded by mocking laughter and skeptical eyes, Emily Carter's life tilted toward a destiny she could never have imagined. The crowd gathered tighter around the paddock, anticipation hanging in the air like the heavy scent of hay and leather. The late afternoon sun slanted through the oak trees, casting long shadows across the ranch grounds, and every eye was fixed on the black stallion pacing within the corral. Thunderbolt was a living storm contained by wooden rails, his mane whipping like smoke, his eyes glinting with fire. He lashed his tail against his flank, nostrils flaring, and when he reared up, the air vibrated with the sound of his hooves striking wood. Even the boldest among the guests flinched back, and for a brief second, silence swallowed the laughter. Mr. Harrison puffed out his chest, his bourbon glass dangling precariously from his fingers. "Behold," he said, voice proud but tinged with strain. "Thunderbolt, the strongest bloodline in Kentucky, untamed, yes, but unmatched in spirit." His words should have inspired awe, yet the unease in the crowd was palpable. The more Thunderbolt fought against the air itself, the more the guests whispered. They remembered stories, a trainer thrown onto the dirt, a handler with a broken arm, a veterinarian refusing to enter the stall without ropes, and 3 men holding the door. The stallion was legend, but not in the way Mr. Harrison hoped. Emily stood near the back, clutching the empty tray against her chest as if it could shield her. She had seen horses before, plenty of them, their quiet strength, their patient eyes. But Thunderbolt was different. He wasn't just untamed, he was furious, his rage rolling off him like heat waves from asphalt. Yet beneath that fury, Emily thought she glimpsed something else. A raw loneliness, a desperate mistrust, as if every human he had ever met had betrayed him. That recognition made her throat tighten. One of the older men in a tailored suit chuckled, breaking the spell. "Fine specimen, Harrison, but useless if no one can ride him." His companions laughed, clinking their glasses. Another chimed in, "A beauty locked behind wood is still a prisoner. What good's a racehorse that can't be shown?" Each barb struck deeper into Harrison's pride. He forced a smile, but his eyes narrowed, sharp as knives. "Perhaps courage is rarer than wealth," Harrison said, letting his gaze sweep the group. "Who among you dares prove yourselves?" His challenge lingered, but no one stepped forward. The men who bragged over pedigrees and winnings now avoided the stallion's gaze, shifting uncomfortably in their polished boots. Even Jake, the young rider who had mocked Emily earlier, shuffled his feet and gave a half-hearted shrug, muttering, "He's not worth a broken neck." The crowd's whispers grew, hungry for spectacle, yet unwilling to risk their own safety. And then came the cruel suggestion that shifted everything. "If none of us gentlemen are reckless enough," a guest sneered, pointing toward Emily, "why not let the little servant girl take a turn? It would be amusing." Laughter erupted again, cruel and sharp. Emily's stomach knotted. She tried to back away, but the eyes of the wealthy bore down on her, pressing her toward the paddock without a single step taken. Mr. Harrison's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He raised his hand, silencing the laughter with a simple gesture. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "it is time to discover if innocence carries more bravery than arrogance." Emily's breath caught. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Keep your head down, Emily. Never draw attention to yourself." But there was no hiding now. The guests turned in unison, their jewels glinting, their smirks daring her. She felt her cheeks flame, her knees tremble. The tray slipped from her hands and clattered to the ground, startling her like a gunshot. Thunderbolt sensed the shift in the air. He slammed his hooves against the dirt, sending up a spray of dust. His ears pinned back, eyes fixed on the movement of the humans beyond the fence. The guests murmured with both excitement and malice, as if they were about to watch a performance, not a child being thrust into danger. Claire Harrison stood at the edge of the crowd, her fingers tightening around the folds of her dress. She wanted to say something, to stop the cruelty, but her father's authority wrapped around her like iron chains. One look from him, and she knew her silence was expected. Still, her heart raced with fear for the girl she had only just noticed, the servant child with too much fire in her eyes to be ignored. Emily wanted to scream, to run, to vanish into the fields beyond the ranch, but she couldn't. Every instinct told her to refuse, yet pride, her own small, battered pride, burned beneath her fear. If she ran, if she cowered, she would not only be mocked, but branded a coward forever. And deep down, she thought of Thunderbolt, thrashing in his pen, as trapped as she was. They were both being forced into roles they hadn't chosen. The stable hands shifted nervously. One of them, a weathered man with calloused hands, looked at Emily with pity. He muttered under his breath, "This isn't right." But no one dared contradict Mr. Harrison. He snapped his fingers sharply, and the man flinched, obeying the unspoken order to prepare the stallion. The gate creaked open. Thunderbolt lunged forward, muscles taut, teeth bared. The handler strained against the reins, sweat glistening on his brow. Emily's breath turned shallow. She stepped forward, each movement heavy as if the earth itself tried to hold her back. The crowd hushed, anticipation humming in the air. She could hear the flutter of her own heartbeat, the creak of leather tack, the stallion's furious snort. Thunderbolt towered above her, a wall of black muscle and trembling power. His dark eyes rolled, flashing whites that spoke of distrust. Emily's knees weakened, but she forced herself to stand tall. She whispered, soft enough that no one else could hear, "I don't want to hurt you. Please, don't hurt me." The horse's ears twitched, a flicker of something passing through his gaze. The crowd, however, saw only a terrified child before a beast they believed untamable. To them, it was entertainment. To Emily, it was the beginning of a test that would change her life forever. The paddock was so quiet Emily could hear the faint buzz of cicadas in the heat. even over the pounding of her own heart. The guests formed a circle near the fence, their silks and tailored jackets shining under the Kentucky sun, their eyes fixed on the girl, who had no way out. A few whispers rippled through the crowd, bets on how quickly she'd be thrown, comments about how reckless it all was. But no one stepped forward to stop it. For them, this was theater. Mr. Harrison stood tall, his smile fixed, as if daring anyone to mock him now. "Up you go," he commanded, his tone more showman than host. The stable hand hesitated, shaking his head slightly. "Sir, she's just a child." But Harrison's glare cut him short. The man swallowed his protest, then turned to Emily. His hands trembled as he offered her a boost. Emily's feet felt glued to the ground. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to bolt through the fields and never look back. But she saw her mother at the edge of the servants' quarters, frozen with terror. If she refused, Harrison's anger might fall on her family. That thought alone made Emily take one step forward, then another, until she stood at the stallion's side. Thunderbolt's massive body radiated heat, his flanks heaving, nostrils wide as he tested the air. She could smell him. Sweat, earth, and a sharp tang of fear that mirrored her own. The handler cupped his hands to lift her. Emily's knees buckled, but she pressed her lips together and climbed, her small hands gripping the saddle horn as if it were the only thing keeping her alive. Thunderbolt reared the moment she touched the leather, a violent surge that nearly threw her backward. Gasps rose from the crowd. A woman shrieked, covering her mouth with a lace glove. But Emily held on, her arms burning, her teeth clenched against the force. The stallion spun in the corral, muscles bunching and twisting beneath her. The world blurred, faces, sky, wood rails, all flashing by as Thunderbolt bucked. Emily's thin legs barely reached around his girth. Her body jolted with each movement, and every second felt like it might be her last. She tasted dirt in the air, felt the sting of sweat in her eyes, and yet some stubborn ember inside refused to let go. "Hold tight," the handler shouted, though his voice sounded distant, drowned out by the chaos. Emily leaned forward instinctively, pressing her cheek against the stallion's neck. His mane whipped her face, coarse and wild, and she whispered without thinking, "I'm not here to fight you. Please, please trust me." Her voice was shaky, but it was soft, not commanding like the men who had tried to break him before. Something shifted. Thunderbolt slowed his frenzy, his ears twitching back toward the girl clinging to him. He stamped hard, throwing dust into the air, then froze for half a heartbeat. Emily felt the pause like a miracle. She breathed deep, trying to steady the tremor in her chest, and stroked his neck with a trembling hand. From the sidelines, Jake laughed harshly. "It's only luck." "Give it a minute and she'll be eating dirt." His voice reignited the whispers of the crowd. Some nodded, eager for a spectacle. Others frowned, sensing something uncanny. Thunderbolt tossed his head, nearly unseating her again, but Emily squeezed her eyes shut and whispered once more. "Easy. I won't hurt you." "You don't have to be afraid." The stallion snorted, his breath hot against her leg. Then, to everyone's shock, he took a single step forward, controlled, deliberate. A collective gasp rose. Harrison's smile faltered. Claire's hands clutched her dress tighter, her eyes wide with something like awe. Emily herself could hardly believe it. She sat trembling, every muscle aching, her whole body expecting another violent explosion. But instead, Thunderbolt stood, his sides quivering, his ears flicking at her voice. The silence stretched, broken only by the heavy sound of his breathing and Emily's whispers. Then, slowly, he began to walk, halting, uneven, but walking nonetheless. The crowd erupted into chaos. Disbelief, laughter, even anger that the spectacle had not ended in disaster. Emily sat taller, though she was still shaking. For a moment she felt an invisible thread stretching between her heart and thunderbolts. Fragile, tentative, but real. She knew this wasn't victory. It was only the beginning of something neither of them understood. But for the first time since she'd been dragged into the spotlight, Emily felt a spark of hope ignite inside her. The corral seemed to shrink around Emily, the laughter and gasps of the wealthy guests dissolving into a haze as the world narrowed to the pounding heartbeat beneath her legs. Thunderbolt shuddered, his immense muscles twitching under her fragile weight. He was not subdued. Not yet. But balanced on the razor's edge, between fury and something else Emily couldn't name. One wrong move could send her flying into the dirt, bones shattered, pride destroyed. The air vibrated with tension. Mr. Harrison's bourbon glass tilted in his hand, forgotten. His face was caught between satisfaction and disbelief. Satisfaction that he had silenced his guests with spectacle. Disbelief that the child had not yet been crushed. Claire stood a step forward, as though her body longed to leap into the corral and drag Emily to safety. But fear kept her rooted, eyes wide, lips parted. The other guests leaned in, fascinated by danger. Thunderbolt's hooves struck the ground, sending jolts through Emily's body. Dust rose around them, coating her tongue with grit. She coughed, but kept her cheek pressed against the stallion's mane. Her small fingers trembled as she stroked his neck again, whispering words that cracked in her throat. "Please, don't throw me." "I'm not here to fight." The horse flicked his ears back toward her, nostrils flaring. The handler hovered by the fence, torn between rushing in and staying clear. Everyone knew interfering now could trigger chaos. The stallion's eyes burned with defiance, yet when Emily's hand brushed the line of his shoulder, his body stilled for a heartbeat. The pause sent a murmur through the crowd. Then he erupted. With a violent surge, Thunderbolt reared high, lifting Emily into the sky. Gasps and cries rang out. Emily clutched the saddle horn, her knuckles white, her stomach plummeting as the stallion's forelegs pawed the air. For an instant she thought she would fall, the world tilting beneath her, the crowd a blur of horrified faces. But instinct, raw, desperate instinct, forced her forward, clinging low to his neck as he crashed back to the ground. The thud shook her teeth. "Get her down!" someone shouted. Another voice laughed nervously. "No, let's see if she lasts." Emily's breath came in ragged bursts, but her resolve hardened. She leaned close to Thunderbolt's ear, whispering with a steadiness she didn't feel. "I know you're scared. So am I. But we don't have to hurt each other." The stallion's ears twitched again, his head jerking side to side. His powerful body trembled like a bowstring drawn too tight. The crowd's jeers blurred into background noise. Emily's world was the heat of the stallion's body, the smell of sweat and dust, the pounding of his hooves. Her fear was raw, clawing at her chest, but beneath it lived a stubborn flame. She would not let them laugh at her family's poverty, at her mother's sacrifices. She would not let them see her broken. Thunderbolt bucked once more, and Emily nearly lost her grip. The saddle horn tore at her palms. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to surrender. She whispered again, softer now, almost like a lullaby. "Easy, boy. I see you. You're not a monster." Something in her tone slipped past the rage. Thunderbolt slowed, his frantic steps faltering into a trot. His head tossed high, mane whipping her face, but his strides evened out. Emily, still clinging, felt the change reverberate through her bones. The stallion was still wild, still dangerous, but his fire no longer burned against her. It burned beside her. Gasps turned to stunned silence. Even Jake, leaning against the fence with his smirk, faltered. "It's impossible," he muttered. Emily drew a shaky breath, daring to lift her head. She loosened her grip just enough to pat the stallion's neck. Thunderbolt huffed, a sound almost like a sigh, and pawed the ground with one heavy hoof. The girl and the beast stood in uneasy stillness, a fragile truce forged under the eyes of those who had expected disaster. For Emily, it was more than survival. It was the first spark of connection, a whisper of trust where none should exist. And in that moment, balanced between terror and wonder, she realized she wasn't only fighting for herself, she was fighting for him, too. The paddock had fallen strangely quiet, the echoes of gasps and laughter dying away into a tension no one dared disturb. Emily sat rigid on Thunderbolt's back, her small hands still clutching the reins, though her knuckles throbbed with pain. The stallion's sides heaved beneath her, heat rising in waves from his body, his breath steaming in the fading afternoon sun. His muscles quivered, not in defeat, but in restraint, as if he were deciding whether to hurl her into the dirt or acknowledge her as something other than an enemy. From the fence line, the guests stood transfixed. For the first time, their smirks were tempered with unease. Some muttered about tricks, others whispered that perhaps the horse was finally tiring, but no one could deny the sight before them. A servant girl, no older than 12, was astride the black demon that had defied grown men. The spectacle they had expected had turned into something unexplainable, and that discomfort left them restless. Claire Harrison, half hidden behind the glittering dresses of her mother's friends, felt her breath catch. She had grown up surrounded by horses, paraded in lessons and competitions meant to polish her as an heiress. Yet she had never seen anything like this. Emily's terror was visible in every line of her body, but so was her defiance. And Thunderbolt, her father's proudest failure, was listening. For Claire, the moment cracked something open. Admiration laced with guilt. Mr. Harrison, however, masked his conflicted thoughts behind a taut smile. To him, appearances mattered more than truth. He lifted his glass, pretending calm, though his jaw worked with silent tension. He had meant to humiliate the child, to turn mockery into control, but now the spectacle threatened to make him look foolish. He could not admit that this girl might have succeeded where trainers had failed. Pride was both his shield and his prison. Emily, meanwhile, felt the crowd's eyes like a weight pressing into her back. Every whisper stung, every laugh, whether nervous or cruel, drove deeper into her ribs. Yet she clung not only to the horse, but to the fragile sense that Thunderbolt was more than rage. She leaned forward, her lips near his ear, whispering again, "It's all right. I'm not your enemy." Her voice quavered, but in that instant, the stallion's ears flicked toward her, catching her words as though they carried meaning. Thunderbolt shifted beneath her, taking 2 heavy steps forward. The ground shuddered under his hooves, the dust rising around them like smoke. The crowd gasped anew. Emily swayed, nearly slipping, but steadied herself with desperate strength. For a heartbeat, she felt something connect, a thread binding her fear to the horse's fury. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the beginning of recognition. Claire's eyes locked with Emily's across the paddock. It was fleeting, a glance stolen through the tension, but powerful. In that look, Emily saw not the polished daughter of wealth, but another girl, lonely in her own way, suffocating under her father's demands. And Claire, in turn, saw in Emily not just a servant, but a mirror of courage she herself lacked. The glance lingered long enough to plant a seed that would grow in secret. Jake broke the silence with a scoff, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "It's only a fluke. Give her a minute, and she'll eat dirt like the rest." His words stirred nervous laughter among some guests, eager to mask their unease. But others frowned, recognizing that something extraordinary had taken place. Even the stable hands shifted, exchanging wary glances as though a line had been crossed. Emily felt her strength ebbing. Her arms ached, her legs burned, and every bone in her body screamed to climb down. But surrender now would mean letting them believe she had been lucky, not brave. So she sat tall, swallowing her fear, guiding Thunderbolt in a slow, halting circle. The stallion's breath came rough, but he obeyed her subtle pressure, his ears flicking at each whisper from her lips. When at last she slid from the saddle, the crowd exhaled as one. Some clapped politely, others murmured, and a few turned away as though denying what they had witnessed. Emily's legs nearly gave out beneath her, but she steadied herself, chin lifted in fragile defiance. Her hands were raw, her body shaking, yet her spirit blazed with the knowledge that she had faced the unthinkable and survived. Thunderbolt stood behind her, pawing the ground but no longer thrashing. His eyes, dark and restless, followed her as she moved. To Emily, that glance was enough. It told her he remembered. And as she looked back at him, their gazes locked for the briefest of moments, horse and child acknowledging each other across the gulf of fear. The guests dispersed in a wave of murmurs, their laughter muted, their arrogance unsettled. But Claire lingered, her gaze meeting Emily's once more before slipping away under her father's stern glare. Neither girl spoke, but both carried the weight of that glance. One had risked everything to hold on. The other had witnessed a courage she could no longer ignore. It was the kind of moment that passed quietly, unnoticed by most. Yet it carried the power to alter everything that came after. That evening, long after the guests had left and the sun had slipped beneath the horizon, the Harrison estate still buzzed with a restless energy. The servants hurried about clearing glasses, sweeping the veranda, and gathering the linens that smelled of spilled champagne. Emily moved among them in silence, her hands aching from the ordeal, her body sore, as if every nerve had been burned. Yet her mind was not on the chores. It lingered on the heat of Thunderbolt's body beneath her, on the way his ears had twitched at her words, and on the fleeting glance she had shared with Claire across the paddock. Something had shifted in her world, though she could not yet name it. Inside the grand parlor, however, the mood was anything but reverent. Mr. Harrison slumped into his leather chair, his bourbon glass refilled, the amber liquid catching the glow of the chandelier. Around him sat two of his business associates, breeders from neighboring counties who had witnessed the afternoon's spectacle. Their voices were low but sharp, edged with mockery thinly veiled as camaraderie. "You nearly had a disaster out there," one of them said, his tone sly. "Imagine the scandal if that child had been killed." Mr. Harrison's jaw clenched. "She wasn't," he said curtly, though the words rang hollow. The other man chuckled. No, but she nearly did what none of your trainers could. That horse walked for her. For her. Not for you. Not for your men. For a servant girl. How will that look when word spreads? The sting was unbearable. Harrison's pride, already bruised, flared into anger. He slammed his glass down, amber splashing over the polished wood. Thunderbolt is a liability, he growled. An untamed beast that threatens to humiliate me further. He is strong, yes, but useless. It's time I rid myself of him. The breeders exchanged knowing looks. There are men in Texas who'll pay handsomely for a horse like that, one suggested. Trainers who don't coddle animals. They'll break him or they'll use him up, but either way, he won't be your problem. Harrison leaned back, tapping a finger against his glass, considering. Perhaps you're right. Better to turn embarrassment into profit than allow that animal to continue mocking me. The decision, though made in a haze of wounded pride, set events in motion that Emily would not soon forget. She overheard it by accident. Passing through the hall with an armful of linens, she paused at the parlor door when voices rose. The words filtered clearly. Sell the horse. Texas. No more humiliation. Emily froze, her breath caught in her chest. Thunderbolt, her Thunderbolt, was to be sold, taken far from the rolling fields of Kentucky, condemned to whatever fate awaited in harsher hands. Her knees trembled as she hurried away, heart hammering. In the kitchen, her mother was scrubbing pots, her face lined with exhaustion. Emily wanted to tell her, to spill everything. But the weight of fear pressed her tongue down. She knew her mother would warn her to keep her head low, to stay away from the family's business. But Emily couldn't. The memory of Thunderbolt's wild eyes softening under her touch burned too fiercely. Later that night, she slipped outside. The estate was quiet now, the lanterns dimmed, the cicadas singing their steady chorus. She padded barefoot toward the stables, the grass cool under her feet. The scent of hay grew stronger as she approached, and in the dim light, she saw Thunderbolt's dark silhouette moving restlessly in his stall. He snorted when he sensed her, stamping a hoof, but when she whispered, "It's me," his agitation lessened. Emily pressed her small hand against the wooden door. "They want to sell you," she murmured, her voice breaking. "They don't see you the way I do. They think you're just trouble." The stallion lowered his massive head, blowing warm air against the wood. Emily blinked back tears. "I won't let them take you." "I don't know how yet, but I won't." She didn't notice Claire at first, standing a few steps away in the shadows. The girl in silk had wandered from the house, drawn by the same restless pull that had driven Emily. Claire watched as Emily whispered to the horse, her face pale in the moonlight, her voice trembling with determination. For a long moment Claire hesitated, torn between loyalty to her father and the stirring admiration she felt for this girl who had faced what no one else dared. Finally, Claire stepped forward. The gravel crunched softly beneath her slippers. Emily spun around, startled, eyes wide with fear at being caught. But Claire only raised a finger to her lips. "I won't tell," she whispered. Her voice was quiet, but it carried a weight of sincerity that surprised them both. For Emily, that night marked the beginning of a secret alliance, though fragile and uncertain. Claire's gaze was conflicted, yet beneath it lay the same unspoken truth Emily felt. Something extraordinary had happened in the paddock, and neither of them could ignore it. "Inside the great house, mister." Harrison raised his glass once more, his decision firm. Within 10 days, the stallion would be gone. But outside, under the watchful moon, a servant girl and a wealthy daughter stood by the restless shadow of a black horse, united in a silent promise neither dared to speak aloud. Dawn crept over the Kentucky hills with a hush that seemed to hold its breath. The Harrison estate, so loud with laughter and music the day before, now lay in silence, its white fences glowing faintly in the pale light. Emily slipped from the servants' quarters with her shoes dangling in her hand, careful not to wake her mother. Her heart pounded with both fear and determination. She had overheard the truth. Thunderbolt was to be sold. And she knew time was running short. The grass was cool beneath her bare feet as she hurried toward the stables. Dew clung to the tall blades, soaking her hem, but she didn't care. The heavy wooden doors groaned as she pushed them open just enough to slip inside. The air was thick with the smells of hay, leather, and horse sweat. In the far stall, Thunderbolt shifted, tossing his mane as though he had been waiting for her. His black coat glistened even in the dim light, a storm contained within 4 wooden walls. Emily whispered, "Good morning, boy," her voice trembling but steady enough to reach him. The stallion snorted, stamping once, but his ears flicked forward. She held out a small apple she had hidden in her apron pocket. At first, he ignored it, nostrils flaring as if to remind her he was no tame pony. Then, cautiously, he lowered his head, teeth snapping the fruit from her palm. The bite was rough, but the fact that he took it at all filled Emily with a hope so fierce she had to blink back tears. "Careful," a soft voice said from the shadows. Emily spun, her heart leaping into her throat. It was Claire, dressed not in silk, but in a simple riding skirt, her hair tied back. She held a small notebook pressed to her chest. "You'll lose your fingers if you're not cautious," she added, though her tone wasn't mocking. Emily frowned. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," Claire replied, stepping closer. "But we both are." She hesitated, then held out the notebook. "I found some of my old riding lessons. Notes about how to handle nervous horses. Maybe they'll help." Emily stared, suspicion battling with gratitude. The wealthy daughter of her mother's employer was offering her help? It felt impossible. But then Claire's eyes softened. "I don't want him sold either," she whispered. "I've seen how they break horses in Texas." "They'll ruin him." That was enough. Emily reached for the notebook, her hands trembling as she took it. "Thank you," she said quietly. The 2 girls stood for a moment in awkward silence, the gulf between their lives vast, yet bridged by the restless stallion who shifted behind the wooden slats. From that morning on, their secret began. Each dawn, before the estate woke, Emily crept to the stables, and Claire followed when she could, slipping away from the suffocating routines of her household. Emily offered Thunderbolt apples, bits of bread, or handfuls of clover she picked along the fence line. She spoke to him in whispers, not commands, telling him about her day, her mother's cooking, the dreams she barely dared to voice. Sometimes she just stood silently, letting him grow used to her presence. At first, the stallion remained wary, his ears pinned back, his eyes rolled with suspicion, and he lashed his tail in irritation. But each day his resistance softened. One morning, he allowed her to brush his shoulder with a curry comb, the stiff bristles sweeping dust from his coat. Another day, he followed her step in a slow circle, guided only by her voice. Emily's heart soared with every small victory. Claire watched closely, jotting down observations in her notebook. "He seems calmer when you hum," she noted one morning. "Maybe the rhythm helps." Emily hadn't realized she'd been humming under her breath, but she tried it deliberately, and to her amazement, Thunderbolt lowered his head, chewing softly, his body loosening with trust. It wasn't easy. Some mornings he reared suddenly, forcing Emily to jump back, her heart hammering. Once, he snapped his teeth so close to her shoulder she felt the rush of air. Another time, he kicked the stall wall, the crack echoing like a gunshot. Each moment tested her courage. But Emily returned again and again, driven by something deeper than fear. The certainty that if she didn't try, no one else would. One afternoon, Claire dared to step inside the stall with her. Her hands shook as she reached out, but Thunderbolt pinned his ears, and she stumbled back in fright. Emily steadied her. "You have to mean it," she said softly. "He knows if you're afraid." Claire nodded, swallowing hard, and tried again, this time keeping her hand firm. Thunderbolt snorted, but allowed her to brush his mane once before tossing his head. It wasn't much, but it left Claire beaming. Their secret training sessions wove them together in ways neither had expected. Emily, who had always felt invisible, found herself with an unlikely ally. Claire, who had lived her whole life in the shadow of her father's pride, felt a freedom she had never known, sneaking through the dew to meet a servant girl and a wild stallion. But the shadow of time pressed heavily over them. Emily remembered Harrison's words. 10 days. Each sunrise felt both like a gift and a countdown. She poured every ounce of herself into Thunderbolt, coaxing him, whispering, daring to believe. And though the stallion remained unpredictable, there were moments, glimpses, when his great dark eyes softened, when his steps fell in rhythm with hers, when she felt the impossible might truly be within reach. The estate continued in its routines above them. Luncheons, visits, the gossip of the wealthy. But beneath that surface, in the quiet hours of dawn, a servant girl and a rich man's daughter risked discovery with every breath. The black stallion, the embodiment of defiance, was slowly changing, and so were they. The days that followed carried a strange rhythm. Early mornings filled with whispered words and the sound of hooves in the dust, afternoons crowded with chores and the wary glances of other servants who had begun to notice Emily slipping away. Thunderbolt was changing. He still tossed his head with defiance, still stomped the ground as if to remind everyone of his power. But when Emily approached, his ears flicked forward and his great dark eyes softened. He no longer lunged at the door when she entered. Instead, he breathed in her scent and seemed to wait for the apple, the clover, or the gentle pressure of her palm against his neck. Claire recorded every detail, her notebook filling with hurried scrawls. Responds to voice commands. Calmer when circle-walked at dawn. Tolerates brushing on left shoulder. She took pride in the small victories, though her father remained oblivious, dismissing Thunderbolt as a lost cause. For Emily, each moment with the stallion was a treasure, though a shadow hung over her joy. She knew Harrison's decision had been made. Within days, Thunderbolt would be sold. Time was slipping like water through her fingers. The fragile balance shattered one hot afternoon when Jake appeared. He was leaning against the fence, arms crossed, a smirk carved across his face. The stable hands parted for him. He had the air of someone who believed the ranch was his playground. Jake was the son of a wealthy breeder and a rising rider, invited often to the estate to curry favor with Harrison. He was older than Emily, quick with a cruel joke, and used to being admired. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice carrying through the dusty air. "If it isn't the servant girl, and her little admirer. His gaze flicked to Claire, lingering just long enough to make her bristle. Didn't know the young lady of the house had taken up mucking stalls for fun. Claire stiffened, but said nothing. Emily's chest tightened. She kept brushing Thunderbolt's mane, pretending not to hear, but Jake's footsteps crunched closer. "You think feeding him apples makes you special?" he sneered. "That horse isn't tame." "He's just waiting for the right moment to throw you into the dirt." He leaned against the stall door, eyes gleaming with malice. "Maybe I should show you how a real rider handles a beast like this." Emily's heart lurched. The thought of Jake yanking Thunderbolt's reins, jerking his mouth with the bit, and shouting commands made her throat close. She stepped protectively closer to the stallion, her voice low but firm. "He doesn't need you." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Jake laughed, sharp and cruel. "He doesn't need me?" "He doesn't need you either, ragged little servant. You think because you sat on his back once that you've conquered him? Don't fool yourself. Horses like this only respect strength. And you? You're nothing." Claire's cheeks flushed with anger. "Leave her alone, Jake." Her voice trembled, but carried more steel than Emily had ever heard from her. Jake's smirk faltered for a heartbeat, but then he chuckled. "Careful, Claire. Your father wouldn't like knowing you're wasting time with her." He tipped his hat mockingly and walked off, but his parting glance promised he would not stay away for long. The stable felt colder after he left. Emily kept her eyes on Thunderbolt, stroking his neck to calm herself. The stallion's ears pinned back, sensing the tension, but gradually he relaxed under her touch. Claire exhaled shakily. "Don't let him get to you," she said softly. But Emily knew better. Jake was not finished. He would return, and next time, he might not be content to only taunt them. Over the next days, his presence became a shadow that stalked their secret work. He lingered at the fence, watching as Emily guided Thunderbolt in slow circles. He made snide comments when she slipped an apple from her apron, suggesting she was bribing the horse rather than earning his trust. And once, when Claire wasn't there, he deliberately slammed a bucket against the stall door, startling Thunderbolt into a frenzy that nearly trampled Emily. Jake only laughed as she scrambled back, her breath ragged, her body trembling. The rivalry was not only about the horse. Emily realized Jake resented her existence. To him, she was a stain. A poor girl daring to step into a world reserved for the wealthy, daring to succeed where others had failed. And Thunderbolt, unpredictable and magnificent, had become the battlefield between them. Still, Emily refused to back down. Each morning she returned to the stall, whispering, coaxing, earning Thunderbolt's wary trust. The bruises on her arms faded, replaced by calluses on her palms from holding the rope. And every time Jake appeared with his smirk, she stood a little taller, though her heart hammered in her chest. One evening, Claire caught Emily alone outside the stables. "He's dangerous," Claire warned, meaning Jake as much as the horse. "My father trusts him." "If he tells—" Emily's gaze hardened. "Then we'll just have to prove them wrong before he gets the chance." The words were braver than she felt, but they lit a spark in Claire's eyes. Together, the two girls turned back toward the stable where Thunderbolt waited, his dark form shifting in the twilight. He was the heart of their defiance, the symbol of everything they stood to lose. And with Jake circling closer each day, the battle for his future, and theirs, was only beginning. The summer sun rose early, painting the Kentucky hills in bands of gold, and Emily was already at the stables before the dew burned away. Each morning felt like a stolen hour, borrowed against the certainty that time was running out. Thunderbolt greeted her with a snort and a stamp of his hoof, but the wild gleam in his eyes no longer sent a chill through her. She had come to recognize his moods, the nervous twitch of his ears when a bird startled nearby, the way he shook his head not out of malice, but frustration. The horse was teaching her as much as she was teaching him. Claire slipped in quietly, her riding skirt brushing against the hay-strewn floor. She carried her ever-present notebook, though the pages were now crammed with hurried sketches and scribbles. "Yesterday he circled twice without stopping," she whispered, excitement warming her voice. "Maybe today he'll let you try again." Emily nodded, though her palms were already damp. Progress had been real, but fragile. The stallion tolerated her touch, followed her voice, even walked calmly beside her when the rope was loose. But one sudden noise, or one flicker of doubt from Emily, could send him surging back into chaos. She knew too well that trust built slowly and shattered quickly. She began the way she always did, offering him a slice of apple, speaking in a low, steady tone, brushing the sweat-darkened fur along his neck. Thunderbolt's ears flicked, and though he stamped once, he allowed her closeness. With Claire watching from the doorway, Emily led him into the small corral. Dust rose under his hooves, the morning light catching the sheen of his black coat. "Walk on," Emily whispered. The stallion snorted, but obeyed, circling her in an uneven loop. She guided him with soft clucks of her tongue, her heart swelling with every step. Claire scribbled in her notebook, whispering encouragement. Then, almost without thinking, Emily placed a hand on the saddle that hung on the fence. She hesitated. The memory of being thrust onto his back before a jeering crowd made her stomach tighten, but something in her knew it was time. With careful hands, she lifted the saddle onto Thunderbolt's back. He flinched, muscles tightening, but Emily soothed him with a gentle hum. "It's all right, boy." Just for a moment. To their astonishment, he didn't explode. He shifted, pawed the dirt, but allowed the girth to be tightened. Claire's eyes widened. "He's letting you," she breathed. Emily felt her chest ache with pride. She stroked the stallion's neck, pressing her cheek briefly against his mane. Still, the fragility of the moment revealed itself when Jake appeared at the far end of the corral. He leaned against the fence, arms crossed, a mocking smile playing on his lips. "Practicing again, little servant?" His voice carried, sharp and deliberate. Thunderbolt stiffened, ears pinning back. Emily's hands froze on the reins, her body tense. Jake's smirk widened. "Go on then, show me your miracle. Or are you afraid he'll remind you who's really in charge?" Emily's throat burned with words she wanted to hurl at him, but she bit them back. Instead, she focused on the stallion, stroking his neck, murmuring softly. Thunderbolt trembled, caught between agitation and the fragile calm Emily had nurtured. Slowly, his breathing steadied. Emily stepped into the stirrup, her heart pounding, and swung herself onto his back. The stallion tossed his head, but he didn't rear. Emily clung to the saddle horn, whispering with every breath. "Easy. We can do this." Thunderbolt stepped forward, one uncertain stride, then another. Claire gasped in amazement. Jake's laughter faltered, though he forced it back with a scoff. Around the corral, Thunderbolt carried Emily in a slow, tense circle. It wasn't graceful, and it wasn't long, but it was more than anyone had imagined possible. Emily's legs shook with the effort of holding on, yet her spirit soared. She had not been thrown. She had not failed. She had ridden him, if only for a minute. When she slid down, her knees buckled, but Claire caught her arm, her own face glowing with pride. "You did it," she whispered fiercely. "You really did." Jake spat in the dirt, his eyes narrowed. "Don't think this makes you special. A horse can stumble into obedience once. It doesn't mean he's yours." He stalked away, leaving his words to linger like smoke. Emily's hands still trembled as she stroked Thunderbolt's muzzle. She knew Jake was right in one way. This was no victory yet. It was only the smallest step on a path that could crumble at any second. But the warmth in Thunderbolt's eyes, the memory of his weight shifting in rhythm with her own, filled her with a fragile, burning hope. Progress, she realized, was never solid ground. It was always walking a tightrope over doubt, one step from falling. Yet, as the stallion lowered his head into her palm, Emily felt she could keep walking a little longer. The days passed with the rhythm of hoofbeats and whispers, each sunrise bringing both promise and dread. Emily awoke earlier than ever, slipping out before the other servants stirred, her heart always carrying the same thought. There was less time now. Every step she took toward the stables seemed heavier with the weight of a countdown she could not stop. Thunderbolt had grown used to her presence. He still tossed his head, still stamped his hooves when startled, but the fury that once flared at every human approach had softened into something wary, almost curious. When Emily brushed his coat, he no longer flinched away. When she guided him in circles, he followed her voice. And sometimes, when the morning was quiet and only the cicadas sang, he lowered his massive head toward her, as if listening to secrets only she could tell. Claire stood faithfully by her side. With her notebook clutched close, she documented every sign of progress, her handwriting cramped and hurried in the margins. She even sketched Thunderbolt's stance, noting how his ears tilted when Emily spoke, how his stride changed when she hummed softly. "We need proof," she whispered one morning as she held up the notebook. "If Father sees what we've done, maybe he'll hesitate." Emily wanted to believe her, but she remembered Harrison's words in the parlor, the cold finality in his voice. 10 days. That number had taken root in her mind, each tick of the clock another cut. She knew men like him did not bend easily to reason or sentiment. To him, horses were profit, and children like her were invisible. The news came in the form of raised voices that drifted across the courtyard one humid afternoon. Harrison was speaking with a stocky man in a dust-colored coat, a man Emily did not recognize. She crouched low behind a wagon, straining to hear. "Arrive by week's end," the man said. "They'll take him off your hands. Good price. No questions asked." Harrison grunted. "See to it. I don't want another spectacle like the last. He leaves this ranch and he doesn't come back." Emily's stomach dropped. Week's end. She counted quickly in her head. Barely 3 days remained. The walls of the estate seemed to close in around her, the air too thick to breathe. She scrambled away before anyone saw, her heart hammering so loudly she feared Thunderbolt would hear it when she entered the stable. Claire found her there later, pacing in front of the stall. "He's selling him sooner, isn't he?" Claire's voice was strained, her eyes wide with dread. Emily nodded, unable to speak. Claire's hand tightened around her notebook. "Then we don't have a choice. We have to show them now. We have to prove he's more than what they think." That evening, they tried harder than ever before. Emily saddled Thunderbolt under the fading glow of lantern light. The stallion shifted uneasily but didn't fight. With Claire watching, Emily swung into the saddle, her breath shallow, her palms slick. She urged him forward, her voice steady despite the panic coursing through her veins. Thunderbolt obeyed, first with a reluctant step, then with a cautious trot around the corral. Dust rose in golden clouds around them. For a moment, the world felt suspended, the black stallion carrying the servant girl with a grace no one would have believed. Claire's face glowed with awe as she scribbled furiously in her notebook. "If Father sees this, he can't ignore it," she whispered. But the fragile triumph cracked when a shadow appeared by the fence. Jake, leaning casually, his smirk sharp as ever. "Practicing for the circus?" he called, his voice loud enough to rattle the night air. Thunderbolt tossed his head, nostrils flaring, nearly unseating Emily. She steadied herself, her teeth clenched, whispering urgently to calm the horse. Jake laughed. "You think you're going to save him? He'll be gone before you can even dream of it. Harrison's already arranged it. That horse is finished." Emily's blood went cold. She knew it was true, but hearing it from Jake's lips made the reality more vicious. She pressed her forehead to Thunderbolt's mane, whispering as much to herself as to him. "We'll show them. We'll find a way." Claire stepped forward, her voice trembling but fierce. "Leave her alone, Jake. You've no right." He tipped his hat mockingly, retreating into the darkness, but his words lingered like smoke. When Emily finally slid from Thunderbolt's back, her legs wobbled, but her resolve held firm. She turned to Claire, her face pale, but her eyes burning. "If we don't show them soon, it will be too late." Claire closed her notebook with trembling hands. "Then we'll make them see," she said. The night wrapped around them, heavy with the smell of hay and the sound of the restless stallion behind them. The deadline loomed, unrelenting, pressing closer with each tick of the clock. For Emily, every breath carried the same vow. She would not let Thunderbolt vanish into the hands of men who saw him only as a prophet to be broken. She would fight, even if her voice was the only one raised against the silence. The morning of the gathering arrived heavy with heat and expectation. The Harrison estate had been dressed for spectacle once again. Lanterns strung across the veranda, tables laden with food, and polished boots clattering against the wooden floors as guests arrived from neighboring counties. Word had spread quickly after the last humiliating display, and this time curiosity was sharper, edged with hunger. People wanted to see the black stallion again. They wanted to see if the servant girl's miracle was real, or if it had been nothing more than a trick of chance. Emily felt the weight of every whisper as she moved through the crowd. She had no choice, now. The decision had been forced. If she could not prove Thunderbolt's worth in front of them all, Harrison would have him sold by sundown. Her knees trembled beneath the thin fabric of her dress, but she clenched her fists, hiding the fear. Across the courtyard, Claire caught her eye. A silent signal of encouragement, her notebook tucked against her chest like a shield. The corral had been cleared for the test. Dust hung in the air, and the scent of leather and sweat lingered sharp. Thunderbolt was led out by two handlers gripping his reins tightly, though he strained against them, tossing his head, ears flat with irritation. Gasps rippled through the crowd. His presence filled the space, huge, defiant, magnificent. He reared once, the sunlight glinting off his black coat, and a murmur of awe swept across the onlookers. Mr. Harrison stepped forward, his voice booming, his smile thin. "Ladies and gentlemen, you asked for proof. Today you shall see it, the stallion that no man could master, and the girl who claims otherwise." His words dripped with irony, as though daring fate to humiliate him once again. Emily's throat tightened. She could hear the cruel chuckles, the soft bets whispered between the men. She'll be thrown in seconds. This time, she won't walk away. She forced herself to take one step forward, then another, until she stood before Thunderbolt. His dark eyes locked onto hers, restless and wild, but not unfamiliar. She whispered, so low only he could hear, "It's me." Just like always. "Listen to me." The handlers hesitated, their faces drawn with worry. One muttered, "This is madness." But Harrison snapped his fingers, and they obeyed, releasing their hold. Emily slid her hand along the stallion's neck, guiding him toward the center of the corral. The crowd leaned closer, their voices hushed, a living wall of expectation pressing in on her. With a deep breath, Emily placed her foot in the stirrup. Her body remembered the terror of the first time, the way the world had spun, the bone-rattling power beneath her. But she pushed the memory down, swung her leg over, and settled into the saddle. Thunderbolt shifted beneath her, muscles rippling, but she bent low, whispering into his ear, "We can do this. Together." The stallion pawed the ground, his head tossing, but when Emily pressed her heels gently against his sides, he stepped forward. Gasps broke from the crowd. One step became two, then three, until he was circling the corral with uneven strides. Emily's heart thudded with each movement, her fingers tight on the reins, but she kept her voice steady. "Good boy. Easy now." Whispers rippled among the guests. Some leaned forward with disbelief. Others scoffed, insisting the horse was too worn out to resist. Harrison stood rigid, arms crossed, his face unreadable. Claire, pressed against the fence, scribbled furiously in her notebook, her lips moving silently as though willing Thunderbolt to succeed. "Faster!" a voice from the crowd called, mocking. "Let's see him trot!" Laughter followed. Emily swallowed her fear, pressed her legs once more, and Thunderbolt responded. His pace quickened, his stride lengthening, his hooves striking the earth with rhythmic power. Dust rose around them in golden clouds, and the crowd fell silent. For the first time, Emily felt more than survival. She felt a rhythm between them, a fragile partnership forged in stolen mornings and whispered promises. Thunderbolt's ears flicked back, listening, and his body moved with hers as though they shared one breath. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away, holding herself tall in the saddle. The silence broke with Jake's voice, sharp and taunting. "If you think that's riding, you're a fool. Make him jump, girl. Show us something real." The crowd laughed nervously, some nodding, eager for more. Emily froze. A jump was dangerous. Thunderbolt had never done it calmly with her before. But she saw Harrison's eyes gleam with cruel interest, and she knew the choice had already been made for her. If she refused, they would call her a fraud. If she tried and failed, they would laugh, and Thunderbolt would be lost forever. She tightened her grip, leaned forward, and whispered urgently, "Please, boy. Just once. Trust me." She guided him toward the small wooden rail set at the far end of the corral, her heart hammering so loudly she thought it might burst. The stallion's stride faltered as they approached. He tossed his head, threatening to rear, but Emily pressed her heels again, her voice steady despite the terror. "With me. Just with me." The moment stretched, suspended in breathless silence. Then Thunderbolt gathered himself and leapt. His body soared, muscles coiling and releasing like springs, clearing the rail with power that drew gasps from every corner of the crowd. Emily clung tight, the air rushing past her face, and when they landed, steady and sure, she let out a cry of joy she hadn't meant to release. The crowd erupted. Some shouted in disbelief, others applauded, and more than a few looked shaken. Harrison's face hardened, his jaw clenched as though swallowing glass. Claire, unable to contain herself, clapped with trembling hands, her eyes shining with relief. Emily slid from Thunderbolt's back, her legs weak, her chest heaving. She pressed her face briefly against the stallion's neck, whispering, "Thank you." His body shivered beneath her, but he stood tall, ears pricked, as if he too understood what they had done. The test was over. The truth had been shown, undeniable, before the eyes of everyone who had doubted. Yet Emily knew, deep in her bones, that this victory was only a beginning. Harrison's pride had been wounded again, and pride never surrendered without a fight. The corral still vibrated with the echo of hooves, the dust hanging like smoke in the hot Kentucky air. Emily stood trembling beside Thunderbolt, her fingers buried in his mane, her chest heaving with the effort it had taken to keep her seat. The image of their leap replayed in her mind in fragments, the surge of power beneath her, the brief flight through the air, the crowd's collective gasp, and the sure-footed landing that had silenced them all. For one breathless instant, she had felt as though she and Thunderbolt were one being, bound together by something deeper than fear. The guests had erupted into disbelief and awe. Some clapped enthusiastically, others shook their heads, muttering about tricks, but no one could deny what they had seen. Thunderbolt, the untamable beast, had carried a poor servant girl over a jump and landed with grace. It was more than spectacle. It was defiance against everything they believed about power, breeding, and worth. Claire's hands stung from clapping, though she didn't care. Her notebook slipped to the ground, forgotten, as she pressed both palms to her mouth to keep from shouting aloud. Pride swelled in her chest. Pride not only in Emily, but in Thunderbolt, too, who had found his voice through hers. For the first time in her young life, Claire felt a rebellious thrill. She had witnessed something her father could not control, and it made her pulse quicken with hope. But the crowd's wonder was short-lived. Harrison's voice cut through the murmurs, cold and sharp. "Impressive," he said with a forced smile. "But a parlor trick is not proof of discipline. A horse must obey under pressure. Let us see what happens when the world is not quiet and still." His words drew nods from men eager to see Emily fail, to watch the fragile miracle shatter. Emily's stomach lurched. She felt the challenge before it was even spoken. Harrison gestured toward a pair of stable hands. "Make some noise. Flags, drums, anything. Let us see if this beast can keep his head when the world demands more than a child's lullaby." The handlers hesitated, but obeyed. They clapped, shouted, banged on a metal trough with a wooden pole. Another servant unfurled a bright cloth, waving it in the air so it snapped like a whip. Thunderbolt's body jolted, his ears flattened, his muscles bunched, and he reared back with a furious cry that shook Emily's bones. The crowd roared with anticipation. Some shouted warnings, others laughed, but all leaned forward, hungry to see the storm. Emily scrambled to mount again, her hands slick with sweat. She swung herself into the saddle, gripping tight as Thunderbolt leapt sideways, nostrils flaring, eyes rolling with panic. The world became chaos, drums pounding, voices rising, the cloth snapping in the air. The stallion bucked, and Emily nearly lost her grip. The saddle horn dug into her palm, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Fear clawed at her, urging her to let go. But somewhere beneath the terror was the memory of the bond they had shared, the fleeting moment of trust that had carried them over the rail. She bent low, pressing her cheek to his mane, whispering words that only he could hear. "It's me. Just me. Don't listen to them. We're together. We can do this." Thunderbolt lunged, his hooves tearing at the dirt, his body twisting like a storm, refusing to be contained. The crowd blurred into a haze of color and sound. Emily's whispers were steady now, her voice threading through the noise like a lifeline. Slowly, impossibly, the stallion's frenzy softened. His breaths came in great, shuddering bursts, his strides evening as if her words were drops of calm seeping into his fire. The noise continued, but Thunderbolt lowered his head, his ears turning back toward her voice. Emily guided him with trembling hands, circling once, then twice, each loop steadier than the last. The crowd's jeers faltered, disbelief replacing laughter. A hush spread, broken only by the pounding of hooves and the stallion's heavy breathing. When Emily finally drew him to a halt, the silence was complete. Dust drifted in golden shafts of light, and the girl and the horse stood at the center of it all, their bodies quivering, their breaths mingling. Emily slid from the saddle, her knees weak, her vision swimming, but her hands never left Thunderbolt's neck. She pressed her forehead against him, whispering a single word through tears. "Thank you." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, from the far side of the corral, a slow clap began. It spread, hesitant at first, then louder, until even those who had scoffed before were forced to acknowledge what they had witnessed. Thunderbolt, the beast destined for chains or sale, had chosen calm, and he had chosen it with her. Harrison's face was pale, his jaw rigid. Claire stepped forward, unable to contain herself. "Father," she cried, her voice trembling but fierce, "you can't sell him now." You saw it. Everyone saw it. Emily did what no one else could. The crowd turned toward Harrison, the pressure palpable. He adjusted his coat, masking the fury beneath his controlled smile. "We shall see," he said evenly. "One performance does not erase months of failure. But perhaps—" His words trailed off, carefully vague, leaving everyone unsatisfied. Emily knew what his silence meant. The battle was not won. But as she looked at Thunderbolt, his head bowed slightly as if in exhaustion, she felt triumph burning in her chest. They had leapt together, not only over a wooden rail, but over the wall of doubt built against them. It was more than survival. It was fate, written in hoofbeats and whispered in courage. The air inside the corral still quivered from the tension of the last leap, but Harrison was not satisfied. His pride had been wounded too deeply to allow the servant girl's triumph to stand unquestioned. He raised his hand, silencing the uncertain applause, and his eyes glittered with the kind of cruelty that came from a man unwilling to lose face. "Enough games," he barked, his voice echoing off the white fences. "A horse that obeys only in calm is no true horse at all. Let us test him properly. Let us see how he fares when the world turns against him." The guests shifted, whispers rising like wind through dry grass. Some leaned forward eagerly, others frowned, uncomfortable with the turn the demonstration was taking. Claire's stomach clenched. She knew her father well enough to hear the danger in his tone. He wasn't testing Thunderbolt. He was trying to break Emily. At his command, the stable hands hurried to the barn. Moments later they returned, arms loaded with whatever could be used to create chaos. Tin sheets clattered together, drums appeared from nowhere, flags snapped in the hot breeze. A group of boys lit firecrackers, the faint sulfur sting drifting across the paddock. Thunderbolt's ears pinned back instantly, his muscles coiled, every instinct screaming to flee. Emily felt the shift beneath her, even before the first bang split the air. The stallion reared, hooves striking skyward, and the crowd cried out in fear and anticipation. Emily clung to the saddle horn, her heart racing. She wanted to scream at Harrison to stop, but she knew it would be useless. This was the trial he wanted, to see her fail, to see the horse broken. Noise crashed from every direction, the metallic clang of tin, the pounding of drums, the snap of flags, the shriek of firecrackers exploding against the dirt. Thunderbolt surged sideways, nearly slamming Emily against the fence. She gasped, gripping tighter, her legs burning with the effort to stay astride. Dust stung her eyes, the acrid smoke filling her lungs. "Hold on!" Claire cried from the fence line, her voice nearly drowned by the din. Emily barely heard her. All she could feel was the storm beneath her, every muscle in Thunderbolt's body straining, every ounce of his power demanding release. For one terrible moment, Emily thought she would lose him. The stallion's eyes rolled white, his body twisting in blind panic. She slid halfway from the saddle, only saving herself by clutching fistfuls of his mane. The crowd roared, certain the end had come. But somewhere in the chaos, Emily remembered the mornings in the quiet barn, the soft hums that soothed him, the way he lowered his head when she whispered. With tears burning her eyes, she bent low against his neck and sang. Not words, just a melody, shaky but real, rising above the clash and bang of noise. Thunderbolt's ears flicked, he snorted, still wild, but his head turned slightly toward the sound of her voice. Emily kept singing, her tone steadier now, pouring every ounce of her heart into the trembling notes. Her hands loosened on the reins, no longer pulling, only guiding, trusting him to hear. The firecrackers popped again, but this time Thunderbolt didn't bolt. His strides faltered. Uneven, then steadied as he circled the corral. His sides heaved, sweat streaked his black coat, but his head lowered. Breath slowing. The crowd, once roaring, fell into stunned silence. One final crash of tin rang out, echoing like thunder. Thunderbolt shuddered, but did not rear. Emily pressed her face into his mane, her song fading into a whisper. "That's it, boy. It's just us. Just us." When she finally drew him to a halt, both of them were drenched in sweat, their bodies trembling from exhaustion. Emily slid down, her legs barely holding her weight. She clung to Thunderbolt's side, her cheek pressed to his heaving flank, tears streaking through the dust on her face. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Then the murmurs began, spreading like ripples through the stunned crowd. They had expected disaster, even death. Instead, they had witnessed the impossible. A wild stallion choosing calm in the heart of chaos, guided only by the voice of a poor girl who should have had no power at all. Claire stepped forward, her fists clenched. "Father, you saw it." He listened. "He's not dangerous. He's misunderstood. And she—" Her voice cracked with emotion as she pointed to Emily. "She saved him." Harrison's jaw tightened, his pride twisting his features. He wanted to deny it, to dismiss the moment as luck, but the eyes of his guests were upon him. He could not undo what they had seen. He could only stand in the growing shadow of a truth he despised, that the servant girl had succeeded where he had failed. Emily, still leaning against Thunderbolt, closed her eyes. Her body ached, Her lungs burned, but her heart was alight. They had faced the trial together, noise and shadows crashing around them, and had come through unbroken. For the first time, she dared to believe that perhaps they could survive what was coming next. The silence that followed the trial pressed heavier than the chaos itself. Dust still drifted in the sunlight, floating lazily as if mocking the storm that had just passed. Emily leaned against Thunderbolt's flank, her breaths ragged, her body trembling with exhaustion. The stallion stood quietly now, his chest heaving, dark eyes lowered as though humbled by his own surrender. The crowd, which had gathered to watch disaster unfold, found themselves hushed, their eyes darting between the girl and the beast that had refused to break. Claire's heart hammered in her chest. She could not hold back any longer. The injustice of it all, the cruelty of the test, the danger her father had forced on both Emily and Thunderbolt, ignited something fierce inside her. She stepped forward, her silk dress streaked with dust where she had gripped the fence, her notebook clutched tight to her chest. "Father," she cried, her voice carrying across the corral, "you can't sell him now." "You saw it. Everyone here saw it." He listened to her. She calmed him when no one else could. Every head turned toward her. The crowd murmured, surprised at the boldness of the Harrison daughter, defying her father in public. Mr. Harrison's face darkened, his jaw set like iron. He did not like being challenged, least of all by his own child. "Claire," he said sharply, his tone like a whip, "this is neither the time nor the place." But Claire's voice only grew stronger. "If not now, when? How many more times will you risk Emily's life just to protect your pride? Thunderbolt isn't a monster. He's misunderstood. And Emily, she's the only one who sees him for what he really is." Gasps rippled through the guests. Harrison's eyes narrowed, fury simmering just beneath the surface. "Enough," he snapped, stepping closer, his shadow looming over her. "You will not embarrass me in front of my peers." Claire lifted her chin, her hands trembling but her gaze steady. "You embarrass yourself, Father. Forcing a child to ride a horse you couldn't control? Treating Emily like she's disposable? That's the real shame." Her words cut through the humid air, sharp as a blade. The crowd stirred. Some guests exchanged uneasy glances, others nodded subtly in agreement, though none dared speak aloud. Harrison's face reddened, his pride unraveling before their eyes. He turned his glare on Emily, still leaning against Thunderbolt, as if she were the source of his humiliation. But it was Claire's voice that carried. Unrelenting. "You always say this ranch is about legacy," she said, her tone breaking but fierce. "What legacy is there in cruelty? What honor is there in selling away a horse that only needed kindness to be understood?" Harrison's lips thinned into a line. His hand twitched at his side, as though resisting the urge to seize her arm and drag her away. But the weight of the crowd's eyes pinned him in place. He could not silence her without exposing the very ugliness she had just named. Emily watched, her chest tight, unsure if she should speak. But Claire glanced at her then, just a fleeting look, filled with unspoken courage. It was enough. Emily straightened, stepping forward despite the weakness in her legs. "She's right," she said quietly, but her words carried in the silence. "Thunderbolt isn't dangerous. He's only been treated like he was. If you sell him now, you'll be destroying something that could make this ranch proud." The crowd erupted again, some muttering in support, others shaking their heads. Harrison stood at the center of it all, his authority fraying. His own daughter and a servant girl had challenged him before everyone, and worse, the evidence of their truth stood beside them in the form of the black stallion who pawed the dirt but remained calm. For a long, unbearable moment, no one breathed. Then Harrison turned on his heel, his coat swirling behind him. "This conversation is over," he growled. "The matter is mine to decide." He strode from the corral, his shoulders rigid, his pride bleeding in every step. The guests began to disperse, whispers chasing them like leaves in the wind. Some shook their heads at the scandal. Others glanced back with newfound respect for the servant girl and the defiant daughter. Claire remained by the fence, her chest rising and falling with the force of what she had just done. Emily moved to her side, Thunderbolt following with a quiet snort, as if unwilling to let her go. For the first time, the two girls stood together openly, the bond between them no longer hidden in shadows. Claire's hand trembled as she reached for Emily's. "He can't ignore us forever," she whispered. "Not after today." Emily squeezed her hand, her eyes glistening with both fear and hope. Harrison had not given in, but something had shifted. The battle was not over, yet the balance of power had begun to tilt. And though the path ahead was uncertain, they had stood against him together, their voices rising above the silence of fear. Thunderbolt stamped once, tossing his mane, and the setting sun cast his black coat in a blaze of gold. In that light, Emily felt the future hovering, fragile, dangerous, but filled with possibility. The ranch was quieter than it had been in weeks. The dust of the confrontation still seemed to hang in the air, and though the guests had departed with their whispers trailing behind them, the weight of what had happened lingered on every whitewashed wall and every polished fence post. Emily could feel it in the way the servants walked more carefully, their eyes darting toward the big house as if expecting an explosion. She could feel it in the way Claire's footsteps echoed when she crept down to the stables at dawn, no longer just the daughter of the estate, but a girl who had stood against her father in front of the world. Thunderbolt paced slowly in his stall, restless, yet oddly calmer than before. His black coat shone in the slant of early morning sunlight, his breath puffing soft and steady into the air. When Emily approached, he lifted his head and let out a low rumble, neither a threat nor a warning, but a sound that felt almost like recognition. She pressed her hand against his warm flank, and for the first time she felt not just his power, but his trust. Claire joined her, still in her riding skirt, her hair tied back loosely. She looked older than she had only days ago, her defiance having carved new strength into her face. "He hasn't spoken of it since," she whispered, meaning her father. "Not to Mother, not to me. But I can see it in his eyes. He's furious." Emily nodded, her chest tightening. "He'll do something," she murmured. "He won't let this go." And yet, for now, Harrison had done nothing. The sale had not gone through. The horse dealers from Texas had not returned. Perhaps it was because Harrison feared another public humiliation if he defied what so many guests had witnessed. Perhaps it was because a sliver of doubt had wormed its way into his pride. Whatever the reason, Thunderbolt remained. For Emily, that was victory enough to breathe again. They continued their secret sessions, though secrecy was less certain now. Stable hands watched from the corners, their expressions caught between awe and fear of their employer's wrath. Some offered Emily quiet nods, silent acknowledgments that they had seen what she had done. The gossip had traveled beyond the estate by now, about the girl who tamed the black stallion with her voice alone. Emily hated the attention, but she clung to what it meant. Thunderbolt's life had value, and others knew it too. One evening, as the sun bled across the sky in streaks of red and orange, Emily took Thunderbolt into the corral once more. Claire leaned against the fence, notebook open, though she barely wrote anymore, content simply to watch. Emily swung onto his back, her movements no longer trembling but smooth. Practiced. Thunderbolt shifted, then steadied, his ears flicking back to her voice. She guided him in a slow trot, dust rising at his hooves, the air heavy with summer's warmth. For a moment, it felt like freedom. Not absolute, not safe, but something fragile and real. Emily closed her eyes, letting the rhythm of Thunderbolt's stride carry her. She could almost imagine a life where she wasn't a servant, where she wasn't forced into danger by the whims of the wealthy. A life where she and Thunderbolt ran together across endless fields with no fences to contain them. When she finally slid down, Thunderbolt lowered his head to hers, their foreheads almost touching. Emily whispered, "We're not done." "Not yet. They might still take you, but I'll fight. As long as I can." Claire's eyes shimmered in the fading light. She stepped forward and placed her hand on Emily's shoulder. "You're not alone," she said firmly. "If he tries again, he'll have to face me too." The promise hung in the air, fragile but strong, like the thread that bound the three of them together. The wild stallion, the servant girl, and the daughter who dared to defy her father. Inside the mansion, Harrison stood at the window, his silhouette sharp against the curtains, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, his face unreadable. He watched the corral, watched the way Thunderbolt bent his head toward Emily, watched the way his daughter stood beside her. Pride battled fury in his chest, and for the first time in years, he felt the uneasy sting of doubt. The sun sank behind the hills, leaving the ranch in a hush of crickets and rustling leaves. Emily lingered by Thunderbolt's side, her hand stroking his mane as the twilight deepened. The future remained uncertain. Harrison's silence was dangerous, a storm waiting to break. But for now, Thunderbolt was still here, still hers. And in that fragile sliver of freedom, Emily allowed herself to hope. If this story touched your heart, drop a simple comment. Just type 0 or 1 to let me know you were here. Don't forget to hit subscribe, because many more unforgettable stories of courage, love, and the bond between humans and animals are waiting for you. Stay with us. The next tale may move you even more.